The reason why their nuclear facilities have not been destroyed, despite weak air defense systems, is because Hezbollah has been a loaded gun pointed at Israel. Iran spent the past 40 years building this capability as its deterrent. I'm seeing this everywhere, which is just like the only reason we haven't started bombing Iran in a major way is Hezbollah. And I'm just like, really?
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Rory, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morris. How have you been this time?
Oh, not bad. No real complaints. How you doing, Rory?
I'm doing all right. I was at a book launch myself. I was at one for David McWilliams' book about money, essentially. He's trying to break down money from its ancient roots to the modern day. And I say it was quite good.
You know, I feel like I've read like 3 or 4 of those books, but you can always write another one because there's just so much to it.
Well, definitely. He's a very interesting man, can be a bit controversial. He's mostly known for predicting the Irish recession because he'd worked in Russia when it had one, and he'd worked in Asia during the Asian recession. He's like, I've had a few of these and I know what they're like when they come along. So, no, very interesting man. And he had a recent episode with a woman from Lebanon. They seem to have a massive diaspora. So,
oh, they certainly do.
That might be something that might help with trying to prevent Israel going to take over the entire region. But Are you aware of anyone that might be tweeting about invasions of such a region?
Yes. Today, I want to talk about one ridiculous tweet from Jared Kushner. And we're going to go through this tweet line by line because I think it indicates not just Donald Trump's foreign policy and how insane it is, but also just a broader, like, Washington, D.C. sense. Like, when it comes to the Middle East, Joe Biden and Donald Trump's policies are more or less identical. Joe Biden has been trying to follow the mold set by Donald Trump for 4 years now, and it's been a catastrophe. This is a model set in very real ways by Jared Kushner. As we come into the last weeks coming up to this election, there's a lot of folks talking about how, Donald Trump is more peace-oriented, or Donald Trump is going to manage things better. And it's laughable. But I think it's actually very useful of Jared Kushner, the architect of Donald Trump's Middle East policy, to come on, lay out something that is this insane. And I think it's worth, we're not doing a ton of election coverage here, but I think this is kind of election coverage. We're recording this 2 weeks out, so there is no way we will be able to do justice to what's actually happening in the Middle East at this moment. But we're recording this on October 7th after the launch of Israel's invasion of Lebanon and Iran's retaliatory strikes on Israel. Many things have happened since, but Washington, D.C. will not change at all. This attitude that Jared Kushner expresses in this tweet, I think, is worth paying attention to. I would say that Joe Biden's approach to the Middle East has been entirely discredited. But it is Donald Trump's approach to the Middle East, which has also been entirely discredited. I am supporting Kamala.
This been the most support America's given to Israel? Because I was listening to El Trapo, and they were pointing out that both Bush and Reagan didn't support Israel as much as Joe Biden is currently.
Oh, I think so. I think that's probably, and that's the kind of incredible thing. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you've heard a lot about just how terrible, I believe, Joe Biden's mismanagement or Genocide Joe's mismanagement of this crisis has been. But what's important to emphasize is that Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's other supporters are mostly criticizing Biden for not doing enough for Israel, which is absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. That's like, now
how much is each weapon shipment worth?
Oh, I don't know. Because there's been dozens, and how do you measure that?
But they run into the billions.
We give Israel $3 billion in weapons a year. I mean, of course, most of that money goes right back to the U.S. for weapons they buy from us.
Back.
But, so $3 billion in a normal year, we've already done official supplementals, adding them, giving them $12 billion more dollars to carry out their genocide this year alone. That probably only scratches the surface because there's all kinds of stuff that can happen behind the scenes. I actually meant to research. I saw someone was talking about an additional $8 billion, but people tend to be fast and loose with that. Just because Congress has approved it doesn't necessarily mean it's happening yet or what have you. But yeah, we've given them at least $15 billion this year alone to do murders. And there's actually a lot of scope to say this is awful, this is wrong. And all Donald Trump is saying is, no, we should do more. And I think this tweet from Jared Kushner is an indication of this lunacy. There is no bipartisan dispute when it comes to Israel, Palestine, and Iran. I am supporting Kamala Harris because there's a possible hope that she'll have the Israel-Palestine policy of George W. Bush would be a vast improvement over what we've seen with Joe Biden's
yeah, but he'd be seen as a radical leftist at this point.
Exactly. Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush would be described by both the leaderships of the Republican and Democratic parties as flagrant anti-Semites for not defending Israel's right to genocide every brown person there ever was. So yeah, I think that is a preface to this insane tweet. For those of you who may not know, Jared Kushner is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. And one of the many, many, many outrageous, norm-destroying things that Donald Trump did was instantly invite his beloved daughter, not his not-so-beloved sons, which is interesting, but his beloved daughter and the much more impressive man that she married, supposedly, to come help him run things. Jared Kushner is a sort of, I think, famous New Jersey, New York, comes from a famous New Jersey, New York property development family, also comes from a Jewish background, which means that he's super interested, does not necessarily mean, but he is of that type of person from a Jewish background who has decided that massive support for Israel is an important part of his identity. So obviously, this guy being the architect of Trump and Biden's Middle East policy instantly prompts questions. He was, I can't remember what the exact title was, Middle East advisor or Middle East special envoy or muckamuck for the Trump administration, and he rolled out, fantastically failed, a policy of the Abraham Accords. So that's who Jared Kushner is. It's unclear whether
was
Jared
he given
Kushner...
his own office? Because he seemed to be the director of American Innovation, which doesn't exist anymore.
Well, Jared Kushner, it was comical during Trump's administration. It was, Jared will handle it, Jared will handle it, Jared will handle it. There's a lot in Donald Trump's character that is, we call it sort of Donnie from Queens. Despite his titanic ego, despite his, he really sort of sees himself as kind of a little less than. And Kushner seems to be like a scion of the more traditional New York money and New York Manhattan elite. So he's always just been very impressed with Jared.
He definitely seems someone very comfortable with his wealth. While Trump always feels a wee bit unsure.
So what that meant was that if there was any kind of problem, and Jared, I think, went to Harvard, and Donald Trump absolutely loves that. So whenever there was a problem or an issue, that was sort of a running joke, was that Jared was running everything and did I think he had something to do with the Veterans Administration at some point, or Veteran Affairs, which has basically led to its privatization, which is terrible. He wasn't useful for much, but I think what he's most associated with is his Middle East policy and the Abraham Accords policy. Which I would argue is probably the main factor that led to October 7th, but he's very pleased with it, remains pleased with it. And Abraham Accords policy is basically the policy of getting Israel to do deals with dictators. The United Arab Emirates, the King of Morocco, who's marginally more legitimate, certainly, than the UAE or Bahraini folks. So Bahrain, Morocco, the United Arab Emirates, and famously and tragically, Sudan, though that government doesn't exist anymore, as Sudan has evaporated into a horrific civil war. Kind of a joke policy guaranteed to make the region more angry at Israel. You don't create sustainable success for Israel by doing deals with the people who are oppressing the Arab populations. We've got a 25% failure rate on the four governments that have signed the Abraham Accords a mere 6 or 7 years later. It is a joke policy. It is a failed policy. The main idea of it was, okay, we're just going to forget the Palestinians entirely, whereas traditionally most Arab governments had insisted that for some kind of normalization with Israel, there had to be some kind of resolution of the Palestine question. The big innovation of the Abraham Accords was F the Palestinians, who cares, they don't matter anymore, which led to the response of October 7th, which was the Palestinians in the form of Hamas, making it damn clear they still matter to some extent.
How did you celebrate the most important day in the Middle East?
Well, I wasn't celebrating.
Since the Abraham Accord?
I was not celebrating, Rory. I was, as I continue to be,
commiserating?
Terrified. No, not commiserating. I mean, Hassan Nasrallah killed. Cool. Plausibility of serious war between U.S. and Iran shooting through the roof is not something that I see as a positive thing. However, as we'll learn, Jared Kushner very much sees it as a positive thing. And yes, this is Donald Trump's foreign policy, but this is also Joe Biden's foreign policy. So Jared Kushner says, September 27th is the most important day in the Middle East since the Abraham Accords breakthrough. As I think we've discussed what the Abraham Accords breakthrough actually mattered. I have spent countless hours studying Hezbollah, and there is not an expert on earth who thought that what Israel has done to decapitate and degrade them was possible. Well, there's an obvious problem with that because the Israeli military and intelligence services clearly believed it was possible because they did it.
Yes. Otherwise, they planned to do it. It wasn't an accident.
Yeah, it wasn't a shock. To be clear, I think this is a rare, unobjectionable paragraph here, and that I think I was legitimately surprised that Hezbollah was this dumb and this bad, and was this easily decapitated. That is legitimately surprising. Legitimately shocking, and but I think, as we shall soon see, Jared Kushner and most everybody else is reading into this a little bit too much. I think the moment that this calls to mind, Rory, is 2003. Iraq actually didn't initially look like a catastrophe. In the first months between, say, March and, July or August of 2003, the invasion of Iraq looked like a brilliant success. Our military was able to absolutely slaughter the Iraqi military. The country soon fell. We were nominally in control of Baghdad. There were already indications that the country was just falling into chaos and civil war. But we were very pleased with ourselves. And I feel like that moment is sort of where we're at right now. We'd sort of taken out Saddam, and we can do anything. And I think taking out Nasrallah, this is sort of
but it's seen as that at that point of the war, things could make sense. There was plans, there was aims that could be achieved, and then it kind of just became mission creep. And I was like, what now? And do you feel like this is what can happen here with Israel? Just sort of go, we've done the thing that we thought was impossible, and now we just keep going until we hit water?
Exactly. It's sort of like we can do anything. So famously what happened in mid-2003 was Iran, Libya as well, actually successfully managed to sue for peace with the United States. And then, of course, 7 years later, we murdered him, to the incredible suffering of North Africa for a decade since. That's a different question. But Iran famously approached the Bush administration after Saddam had been toppled, I think before we captured him, and said essentially, like, what do you want? Like, we will give up on Hamas. We will give up on Hezbollah. Like, let's just make a deal. And Bush was like, nah, man, we're coming for you. And Iran was like, well, okay, and funded, as well as Saudi Arabia and some other folks, a massive insurgency that made it a catastrophe. And, of course, Jared Kushner's tweet here is a perfect example of that. Oh, now everything's on the table again, as we shall get to. This is significant because Iran is now fully exposed. The reason why their nuclear facilities have not been destroyed, despite weak air defense systems, is because Hezbollah has been a loaded gun pointed at Israel. Iran spent the past 40 years building this capability as its deterrent. I'm seeing this everywhere, which is just like the only reason we haven't started bombing Iran in a major way is Hezbollah. And I'm just like, really? Like, people just, this is part of this like incredible overemphasis of the importance and the threat of Hezbollah. I just don't really buy it. You know, like there have been tons.
But it's also the idea that that both America and Israel are just can't wait to invade Iran. Like, I'm sure there are some people that do, but can't you just treat it like a country you aren't the best of friends with?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you can't sell a lot of weapons on the basis of countries you're just not friends with. The point here is apparently we want to keep this fight going. And this is kind of ridiculous because we have kept this fight going. Like, Israel has assassinated top-level Iranian scientists in Iran. This is like has conducted large-scale sort of digital sabotage and just destruction of civilian infrastructure in Iran on a large scale.
Stuxnet, wasn't it?
Well, Stuxnet, and there's been a number. I think I can't remember, was it last year or there were just series of Iranian power plants would keep blowing up. So that, like, this idea that we've somehow been restrained from attacking. No, what has restrained the physical bombing of the nuclear facilities is the understanding that would launch a major war, and that would be a bad idea. The Hezbollah's presence there or not being there doesn't make too much difference. And also there's just this incredible hubris, which is saying that, Hezbollah's gone. It's gone now. Iran is now fully exposed. And it's just like, nah, not really. Like, North Korea doesn't have a Hezbollah. It's not fully exposed now. It's just lunacy is what it is. President Trump would often say, Iran has never won a war, but never lost a negotiation. Well, both of those statements are dramatically incorrect. They won the Iran-Iraq war handily, and they absolutely were demolished in a negotiation. The JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, was the most humiliating and one-sided arms restriction agreement in human history. Can you think of
Yeah, but Obama did it, so it must have been bad.
Yeah, exactly. Like, can you think of any other arms restriction agreement where only one side has to give anything up? They signed a deal with the United States and a range of other nuclear powers saying, not only are we never going to develop a nuclear weapon, we're going to let you send in a humiliating bunch of inspectors to check that we won't develop a nuclear weapon. Just an absolute. So obviously, neither Jared Kushner nor Donald Trump is at all connected with reality, because the Iran nuclear deal was an absurdly lost negotiation. Iran also won the war against ISIS, actually, which eventually the United States started bombing, but we created first by invading Iraq and then by opening a massive free fire zone for jihadis in northern Syria. So, Iran wins wars occasionally. I'm not saying they are guaranteed to win wars, and they also definitely lose negotiations. So yes, Donald Trump and Jared Kushner being an idiot. The Islamic Republic's regime is much tougher when risking Hamas, Hezbollah, Syrian, and Houthi lives than when risking their own. Their foolish efforts to assassinate Donald Trump, which is what? I've seen no documentation.
When did that happen?
It didn't. And hack his campaign, now they did hack his campaign, reek of desperation and are hardening a large coalition against them. So the Iranians did hack President Trump's campaign, have apparently not found much worth talking about because everybody knows that Trump's campaign people are just a bunch of ineffectual idiots.
This is the most recent campaign, I take it?
Yes, there's famously...
So he claiming one of those two assassination attempts was Iranian-backed? Is that what's happening here?
Who knows? Who
Who
knows?
knows?
Yeah, I think it's probably just living in a weird right-wing bubble, and whatever you say is likely to stick with it. But I also love this idea that their foolish efforts to assassinate President Trump and hack his campaign reek of desperation and are hardening a large coalition against them. I love the idea that anybody would be like heartbroken if somebody assassinated Donald Trump internationally. That is not the world we live in.
It's the idea that, say, Finland was completely not or completely supported Iran, and then heard that like Trump's team got hacked a little bit, and then they're like, "That's it, we've completely changed our minds.
That's the final straw.
Completely against Iran now."
That's the final straw. Yeah, exactly. It's I don't think it's not something that's actually happened. Iranian leadership is stuck in the old Middle East, while their neighbors in the GCC, this is the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, UAE, others, are sprinting towards the future by investing in their populations and infrastructure. So that's obviously a big part of the Abraham Accords idea here, is that, Israel's going to, get in bed with all these dictators who are rushing towards the future. It's kind of interesting, like the delusions of the Abraham Accords. So
does that include Sudan?
Yeah. Sudan is not in the GCC. Sudan, famous Abraham Accords signatory Sudan, is not zooming towards the future. But neither are Saudi Arabia or the UAE.
No, sadly not.
The whole point of the Abraham Accords
But they dug a big hole in the desert and called it the line.
Yes, there's that. But the Abraham Accords are supposed to be, like the way that they were supposed to be, the way that they're oriented is getting these dictators to throw over the Palestinians, because these dictators in the GCC are so worried about Iran, because they're terrified of Iran and they want to compete against Iran.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole justification for the Abraham Accords has disappeared over the past 5 years, because Iran carried out or through the Houthis or with the Houthis, I don't know, carried out a very successful attack against a Saudi oil refinery back in 2019. And since then, Saudi Arabia has been working really hard to get as close to Iran as possible. So this whole Abraham Accords thing is based on a fantasy. Saudi Arabia does not want to go to war with Iran. That's like kind of the whole point of the Abraham Accords. It's like, Israel and the Gulf, we're going to get together. That made some plausible sense in 2016, 2017, when the Saudis were still saying that, the Iranians are worse than the Nazis or whatever. That hasn't been the case since 2019. Like every other week, you have Iranian and Saudi government contacts. They're signing deals. They're opening embassies. Like the whole Abraham Accords fantasy has disappeared entirely. But the Biden and Trump administrations like living in fantasy, so they're going for it. This other aspect that like the GCC, and you know what? It's true, actually, that Saudi Arabia, at least, has made some pretty stunning reforms, but they're nowhere near enough. You can see that. Like they're now closing in on having a current account deficit. Essentially, like they are now spending more money.
Because I've seen the Financial Times was basically like Saudi Arabia has all this untapped labor, aka women, it can now exploit. So things are getting slightly better.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it's been doing that. They've introduced taxes. They have tried to get away from migrant labor a little bit. They're doing real things, but they're doing real things that would really matter about 40 years too late. And like this idea that like they are, somehow they're not collecting any outside investment on a serious scale. They tried to sell Saudi Aramco and mostly sold it to princes. It's just not actually something that's happening. The Iranian leadership is stuck in the old Middle East, while their neighbors in the GCC are sprinting forward by investing in their populations and infrastructure. They're becoming dynamic magnets for talent and investment, while Iran falls further behind. As the Iranian proxies and threats dissipate, regional security and prosperity will rise for Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. As the Iranian proxies and threats dissipate, I think what we're going to see is a region that is much, much more focused on the terrifying things that Israel are doing. And that's the thing, is he's actually right about this. The Iranian threats are dissipating. not because of recent destruction of Hezbollah's leadership, but because Iran is now talking with all the GCC people. Like they're now actually establishing peace and not quite business relationships yet because U.S. sanctions are too powerful. But I think that's like just sort of a matter of time. And this idea that, putting Christians first is kind of amazing when you consider a legacy across Bush, Obama, Biden, or whatnot. Nothing has been worse for Christianity in the Middle East than U.S. military action.
Oh, yeah. Because you have a Christian country committing horrors, which then overspill to just random Christians.
Oh, well, I think that's a dynamic. But if you, Iraq and Syria both had, not like huge, but like, maybe 10% Christian population in Syria, and I think probably significantly lower in Iraq, but real, and, kind of defended by the Assad and Hussein regimes. It's good for minorities to get in good with the people in power. And those populations have been utterly destroyed. First by Bush's invasion and destruction of Iraq, and then by Obama's destruction of Syria through jihadi proxies. This idea that, Washington, D.C. action is somehow good for Christianity in the Middle East is absolutely farcical. And the idea that Jared Kushner, whose Abraham Accords policy is like explicitly about abandoning the Palestinians, is kind of rich to have him talking about things being good for Muslims. And honestly, it's not good for Israel to have a state of constant war that is, giving Jared Kushner such a hard-on here. So it's actually not good for anybody. But yeah.
Yeah, but it's hard to sort of argue political nuances within different parties when you want to stay in charge forever, like Benjamin might.
Well, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yes, Netanyahu definitely. Wow, man, I have a visceral dislike for that man that has gone far beyond my dislike for Donald Trump at this point. It is quite horrifying to be
Donald Trump. Donald Trump's a bit more of a. Seems like he does have some of his own agency, but he feels like he's manipulated a lot more. While a lot of this is Benjamin's in the driving seat and wants exactly this to happen. Though of course Benjamin Netanyahu is a tool of U.S. defense companies first and foremost. Israel now finds itself with the threat from Gaza mostly neutralized and the opportunity to neutralize Hezbollah in the north. It's unfortunate how we got here, which is extraordinary, but maybe there can be a silver lining in the end. So when he says it's unfortunate how we got here, he's not referring to the hundreds of thousands. It is unfortunate that we've gotten here, but I think you and I disagree on his interpretation of unfortunate.
Yes. I think he's referring to those 700 innocent Israelis that were killed on October 7th, not the couple 100,000 Palestinians that have been murdered since. But there is no silver lining in the end, because what he's talking about, the threat from Gaza is mostly neutralized. That is true. But the opportunity to neutralize Hezbollah in the north, I think, is farcical. We've already seen, Israel's invasion of Lebanon is 24 hours old, and it's already killed 10 or so Israeli soldiers. That will only accelerate. Israel has won a great victory by decapitating Hezbollah's leadership, but this assumption that Hezbollah is just going to be easy to conquer now, I think is probably by the time this is published, will have been shown to be farcical. Anyone who has been calling for a ceasefire in the north is wrong. There is no going back for Israel. What is this no going back for Israel? They cannot afford now to not finish the job and completely dismantle the arsenal that has been aimed at them. They will never get another chance. I just don't understand this, Israel's last chance. Israel's in so much. Israel has never been safer. Israel is, since the 1990s, Israel has been operating in a context of extraordinary peace and prosperity and freedom from any serious threat. They have, I would argue consciously, but perhaps unconsciously, maintained some level of threat from incredibly oppressed Israeli subjects, also AKA the Palestinians of the West Bank and Gaza. But this is their mismanagement and their poor treatment of half of their population. This is not some crazy threat and oh no, things are accelerating and getting worse. Like, the only reason they have an Iranian enemy 1,000 miles away is because they've worked really hard to maintain that. So yeah, this like, oh, Israel's last chance stuff is just nonsense. And frankly, Israel's tremendously safe and secure.
But you got to get it done before the election.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, well, that there may be. I think there's some truth to that. Actually, that's a good point. I think that whoever is president in January is very likely to finally tell Israel to knock the genocide off. After the brilliant, rapid-fire, tactical successes of the pagers, radios, and targeting of leadership, Hezbollah's massive weapon cache is unguarded and unmanned. What? Ask the 10
He didn't
Israeli...
kill everyone in Hezbollah.
Yeah. Most of Hezbollah fighters are hiding in their tunnels. Again, ask those 10 dead Israeli soldiers. Anyone still around was not important enough to carry a pager or be invited to a leadership meeting. Okay, that's just nonsense. Iran is reeling as well, insecure and unsure how deeply its own intelligence has been penetrated. Failing to take full advantage of this opportunity to neutralize the threat is irresponsible. Like, I love that this characterization of it is irresponsible to not undertake war against Iran or another invasion of Lebanon. It's ludicrous. I mean, it's someone arguing for something incredibly irresponsible and saying to not do this would be irresponsible.
But I'm certain he's right about Iran feeling insecure.
I think he's right. But I think Iran has already shown in the 3 days since this was written that they are very capable of lashing out and hitting back. And this idea that, I
but
joked...
hasn't recently helped them with the war with Ukraine and Russia, as in they're getting a lot of money selling their oils at the moment, are they not?
Well, Iran is actually selling a ton of oil to China. That's the the Biden administration has allowed them to do that. And that is related to Russia and Ukraine because when oil prices did briefly spike when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Biden administration made the decision to stop enforcing the Iranian sanctions as heavily as they were. So China is officially buying millions of barrels of oil a day from Malaysia, which does have an oil industry, but has an oil industry with production a lot lower than it actually is selling to China. So everyone knows that's Iranian oil. So certainly Iran has money from that. But yeah, just this idea that Iran is reeling, insecure, is overconfident. I've been hearing some amazing stories about how Israel has been collecting intelligence over the past 10 months with some brilliant technology and crowdsourcing initiatives. I mean, yes, that's true. That it is very impressive the way
also,
that they destroyed Hezbollah.
Haven't they done a lot of spying on this little country called the United States of America throughout its history?
Yes. There's a fair amount of... Israel does do a fair amount of that as well.
I remember hearing about that they were stealing plans from America so they could leverage it with the Soviets, back in the 80s. Like, the espionage that Israel seems to get up to is outstanding, and it's just a bit like, boys will be boys.
Yeah, and I think there was famously, Pollard, I think, was a famous spy from the 80s, and didn't we give him back recently? Jonathan Pollard was jailed for spying for Israel.
Well, they probably need him.
Oh, I don't know that they need him. No, I'm very confident that they don't need him, but he was, yes, so he was released in 2015. Oh, great. That's delightful. So I was like, Jonathan Pollard is probably one of the most famous spies. Not entirely certain on how he was providing top secret information to Israel and also to some other countries. The Israeli government did acknowledge that it was involved in this and did a formal apology. But on 2015, I guess a mere 30 years later, Pollard was released back to Israel, and he is now a big supporter of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is one of the nastiest people in the Israeli government. So yeah, Israeli espionage. Wow. Delightful. But today, with the confirmed killing of Nasrallah and at least 16 top commanders eliminated in just 9 days, was the first day I started thinking about a Middle East without Iran's fully loaded arsenal aimed at Israel. So many more positive outcomes are possible. It's like this admittedly a victory, but it's just putting into the minds of people like Kushner, who's most likely going to be shaping Donald Trump's foreign policy, this idea that because we managed to pull off this thing against a tiny militia just north, a couple dozen miles north of Israel's border, we can topple Iran. We can, and what he's talking about here in this sort of like la-di-da, like pleasant way is not diplomacy. We tried that and then we burned it up with Iran. Like what he's talking about, this free of Iran's weapons, is he's talking about some variety of destruction meted out against Iran, a country of 70 million people. And he's talking about the United States spending billions, if not trillions of dollars to do that. This is the fantasy that not just Kushner, not just Republicans, but also Democrats, unlike the U.S. military-industrial complex blob, has been pushed into by this victory over Hezbollah. So many positive outcomes are possible. This is a moment to stand behind the peace-seeking nation of Israel and the large portion of Lebanese who've been plagued by Hezbollah and who want to return to their times when their country was thriving, and Beirut, a cosmopolitan city. Beirut, to be clear, Beirut is a cosmopolitan city. Like, I have a lot of friends who live there. Yeah. I've been partying there over the past decade, and it's a pretty extraordinary place that has absolutely been run down, absolutely by Hezbollah, but also by Saudi Arabia, also by the United States, also by Christian and Sunni members of the Lebanese ruling class. Like this idea that, it's just Hezbollah that's the problem for Lebanon is pretty farcical, but it's nowhere near as farcical as the peace-seeking nation of Israel, which is just an extraordinary phrase to read in this day and age. The peace-seeking.
Genuinely, with civil wars stuff going on currently, is Israel up to the most murder this year? Like,
what do you mean?
It's just outstanding to be like, Israel is peace-seeking. It's like, but every country that goes to war says that. Like, Russia says that. Like, we all say that to justify a war.
Mm-hmm. I think more people are dying physically in Sudan for sure, but there are 40 million Sudanese, and there are only 2 million people in Gaza. Proportionally, it's the worst thing that's been happening, plausibly worst thing that's been happening this century. But in terms of a number of people dying, Sudan is probably worse. Congo is probably, even though nobody's calling that currently a war, probably more people are dying there. But that's because there's, I don't know how many Congolese there are.
Just more people?
But tens times more many. Almost 100 million, yeah. So there are 50 times more people in the Congo, so and there are 40 million people in Sudan, so perhaps that civil war is killing more people than Israel's killing, but nobody is killing on a more imbalanced, more horrifically unjust scale than Israel is, that's for sure.
Industrial.
Yeah, and it's killing its own population is the key thing. Which is distinct. What it's doing in Lebanon is actually a war. What it's doing in Gaza is an extermination. It is a liquidation of like the Warsaw Ghetto. This is a peacekeeping. This is the peace-seeking organization, nation of Israel. And I think absolutely Hezbollah has been terrible for Lebanon, as I believe Hezbollah has been terrible for the Palestinians. As I think we talked about last week, what the axis of resistance has fundamentally done is provide the excuse, the perception of insecurity that has allowed Israel to pursue genocide in Palestine. So that's mostly what Hezbollah has done. But the Lebanese have many, many problems other than Hezbollah.
Oh, yeah. It's outstandingly corrupt, especially with that massive fertilizer explosion. Like, the amount of complexities over what went wrong there is just outstanding and shows many things wrong with that country. But I don't think Israel's helping.
No. And, I mean, Israel has been a huge part of the problem. Lebanon's initial fall was destabilization that led to civil war, was the massive Palestinian refugee population that Israel kicked out in 1948. And then, of course, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon that, among other negative results, created Hezbollah. Blaming everything that's wrong in... Yes, actually, if everything in Lebanon that goes wrong in Lebanon is Hezbollah's fault, then it's Israel's fault, because Israel created Hezbollah by invading Lebanon. But that's apparently in the countless hours that Kushner spent studying Hezbollah, he didn't come across that basic fact.
What role will the Lebanese army take in this?
Oh man, that's
from what I understand, they've immediately left. So, Libya technically has two armies. It's all very strange. And will Israel do its best to not kill anyone from the sort of Lebanese army proper?
I think that Israel used to work a lot harder on that. I'd be surprised if that is as much of a priority now, as they're much more willing to kill Lebanese civilians. I'm sure they're much more willing to kill members of the official Lebanese military. Yes, so Hezbollah is, I think, holds sway in the south of Lebanon. It's not just the official Lebanese army that is pulled out of southern Lebanon. That is an interesting dynamic. And I think that also speaks, though, to how ridiculous it is that Kushner and a lot of other people are falling into these rhapsodies of joy over the end of one leadership class of Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah is a small organization. Lebanon is a country of 6 million people. Nobody's done a census in Lebanon for 50 years, but the Shia population from which Hezbollah is drawn is no more than 1.5 or 2 million people. And a lot of those people don't like Hezbollah. So this is a tiny militia generated from a tiny population. And it's honestly a testament to how poorly Israel and the United States had managed the conflict to this point that such a small organization was seen as this massive threat to Israel. And defeating this tiny organization...
But if you say it enough times on the news, then it can seem scary.
It can. So defeating this tiny organization, which I don't really think has been defeated, really, that is yet to be demonstrated. In fact, by the time this is up, we'll have a much clearer picture of that. Seems kind of insane. It is hubris. It is daring the gods. Okay. The right move now for America would be to tell Israel to finish the job. It's long overdue, and it's not only Israel's fight. Okay, so finish the job is what Israel's been doing in Gaza for a year now. Finish the job is essentially, the final solution. Is what finishing the job means. Clearly, if Israel could do this to Hezbollah in this short period of time, they could have destroyed Hamas 9 months ago, and are choosing not to because to finish the job, they want to empty out Gaza. And in the Lebanese context, finishing the job means emptying out South Lebanon, which honestly they could probably may be able to do more easily than they can empty out Gaza, because northern Lebanon has no choice but to take refugees, whereas Egypt is refusing to. Finish the job here has some pretty terrifying implications. And then we get to, and it's long overdue, and it's not only Israel's fight. More than 40 years ago, Hezbollah killed 241 U.S. military personnel, including 220 Marines. That remains the single deadliest day for the U.S. Marine Corps since the Battle of Iwo Jima. Later that same day, Hezbollah killed 58 French paratroopers. And now, over the past 6 weeks or so, Israel has eliminated as many terrorists on the U.S. list of wanted terrorists as the U.S. has done in the last 20 years. That has got to be wrong. Including Ibrahim Akil, the leader of Hezbollah's Islamic Jihad organization, who masterminded the 1983 killing of those Marines. I think we talked about this in the last episode, but it's kind of hard to blame Hezbollah, formed in 1985, for a killing carried out in 1983. This guy, Ibrahim Akil, who I've got to say I am not sad to see dead, appears to have joined Hezbollah after the fact. But it's just deep historical ignorance, bringing up a horrific thing that happened 41 years ago, as if it has some kind of modern relevance.
It kind of reminds me of when you hear a billionaire talking about how hard their grandfather used to work, and then you realize that's the last time anyone related to them has done any manual labor. It's 40 years ago. Is this the most recent link you can get to America and a NATO country? That is out. It shows almost just how peaceful things have been.
Yeah, and what happened
if this is how far you have to go back.
And what happened in 1983 is stupidly put a lot of U.S. soldiers into a civil war that had been going on since 1975 and got burned for it. And obviously, I'm not heartbroken. The guy who masterminded that is dead. But, we made a really stupid choice. And Ronald Reagan, to his credit, was like, this was dumb and pulled us right out of there, which was a very good choice that Ronald Reagan made. The idea that, you're going to use this result of a horrifically stupid choice as an excuse to make another horrifically stupid choice, expanding the war in the Middle East, is really bothersome. And this is supposedly the alternative. You can make a great case that Genocide Joe and his administration have been way too supportive of Israel, but that's not what Donald Trump is saying. What Donald Trump and the people who are working for him are saying is that they're not being supportive. The Biden administration is not being supportive enough of Israel, and it's not. No, so Jared Kushner has the expectation, certainly, of the Gulf countries that have bribed him with $2 billion is that Jared Kushner will be back in power. You don't give a guy $2 billion if you don't think he's going to be back in the White House. But it's entirely possible that Ivanka could be like, we're not going back there. It's entirely possible that Donald Trump's other advisors will say, we're not letting that Kushner kid back in here. But what Kushner is saying here is not at all different from what Mike Pompeo is saying. Mike Pompeo, the only guy who seemed to serve Donald Trump at a high level and survive 4 years, the guy who was the head of the CIA and then the Secretary of State, he's been spouting the exact same kind of garbage. I mean, not quite as delusional or at length as Jared Kushner has here, but, exactly the same sort of brain-dead aggressive stuff. Robert C. O'Brien, one of his advisors, who people are talking about as a potential national security advisor for Trump, spouting the same belligerent nonsense. This is what Trump's foreign policy is. It is not a rebellion against the deep state. It's not a way to attack the blob or the warmongering elites. It's just the same thing. It's the same set of ideas. And it's led to horrific catastrophe in the Middle East and will only bring more. I couldn't, if Joe Biden were running against Donald Trump, I don't think I could, in any kind of good conscience, make a case that he would do a better job than Donald Trump. But Kamala Harris is a vice president. She has had no say in what has been done by the Joe Biden administration. And if you look into the details, if you look at what most of the State Department, most of the Defense Department, and most of the diplomatic corps of the United States is saying, these are all people who are huge supporters of Israel. They're saying that Biden's policy is insane, aggressive, both this insane combination of incredibly aggressive against the Palestinians and incredibly weak, historically weak, with respect to Israel. Donald Trump is promising to do worse on both counts. Kamala Harris, if she gets into power, we're not, it's already clear that Anthony Blinken and Jake Silver and all those other worthless pieces of garbage. I wish we could get an assurance that Amos Hochstein and Brett McGurk would be going as well. But those guys would probably be working for Trump. It seems like there will be a real chance under Kamala Harris for sanity in the Middle East. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm saying it's a chance. With Joe Biden or with Donald Trump, there is zero chance for any kind of increased sanity in the U.S. approach in the Middle East. Jared Kushner's tweet, what everybody else has been saying about that, makes that very clear. So I think it was worth going through this whole tweet because it is indicative of where Donald Trump is coming from on the Middle East and why we don't want to go there.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you join us next time on the More Freedom Foundation podcast.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. and music provided by Kevin MacLeod.